a very warm welcome to this special broadcast on Doordarshan India. We are coming to you from Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, and behind me you can see the Belém Presidential Palace. Today we have a very special guest. We will soon be in conversation with the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. But before that, here's a brief introduction of the President. Marcelo Nuno Duarte Rebelo de Sousa was elected as the 20th President of Portugal on 24th January 2016. Before he took a plunge into politics, he wore many hats. As a lawyer, journalist and political commentator with a following in millions. Born in Lisbon on 12th December 1948, he studied law and political science and later taught law at the University of Lisbon. He founded Portugal's influential Expresso newspaper in 1973 and helped draft the new democratic Portuguese constitution of 1976. In the mid-1970s, he became one of the founders of the centre-right Social Democratic Party, which went on to become one of the two major political parties in Portugal. But he contested the 2016 Portuguese presidential election as an independent rather than representing the party he founded. President Marcelo connects to the common man. His generous hugs, especially to the homeless and suffering, have made him a much beloved figure who elicits biggest cheers from the public. Keen to mingle with the crowds, he is willing to take selfies with whoever asks. His common touch makes him an unconventional president. So let's welcome the President of Portugal, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, who is right here with us. Welcome, Mr. President, to Doordarshan India.
You are at home.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Your home here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You just make everyone feel at home, I must say that. For starters, tell us about the etymology of your name, because the Portuguese tradition says that you put the name of your mother and the name of your father, but the story behind your name is quite different. So tell us about that.
Well, it is that way. I mean, I'm called Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. And Rebelo de Sousa is just my father's name, because my mother has a Jewish tradition and she would be called, well, Fernandes Duarte. It would be a very long name. So I just took Marcelo, Nuno, so I have two first names, and then my father's name, Rebelo de Sousa. It changes, you know, it depends of the region where you were born and the influence of that region. In my case, that was the mixture that my parents discovered when I was born in '48, a long time ago.
Absolutely, it's an interesting story, I must say. But before you took a plunge into politics, you were known for your incisive political commentary in your television and radio shows. So how has the journey been from rating politicians to being rated?
Well, it started in '65. I wrote my first article at the age of 16. And then I went on working in local papers, national papers, the leading weekly paper, Expresso. I was the editor. At the same time, I read law. I became a public law professor. That was my dream, to be a law professor, not to be a politician. But after the revolution, before the revolution already in some youth movements, but then after the revolution, I was in the foundation of a party, a so-called Social Democratic Party. It is a center right-wing party. And I became at the point leader of the party, and working always in local power at the same time. Don't ask me how. Being professor, being almost journalist, working local power, national politics. And then I went into radio first, and then TV for 16 years and a half. And well, making, as you say, as a kind of commentator, on politics, on economics, on international institutions, and also books.
Oh yeah.
And, yes, books.
We'll explore
too,
that in a while.
and it was on Sundays evening, 1 hour. I even got the audience of 2 million people, 2.5 million people, in 10 million people, which is the Portuguese population, which is not bad. Well,
So it's
and
a long
then
journey.
I was not expecting, after my experience, I had approved the constitution.
Yeah.
At the age of 20 something, I belonged to the constituency.
Yes.
And then being leader of the party and having resigned at the point,
Yeah.
I decided I won't be back in politics. And all of a sudden, when a new government was elected in 2015, a left-wing government,
Yes.
perhaps the most radical left-wing government after the revolution, I decided that we should balance the situation coming from the center-right, but having a good dialogue with the left. I could be the bridge in a kind of cohabitation, left and right, right and left. Well, I was elected, here I am.
Yes,
And-
absolutely. So that's about your journey. Mr. President, Prime Minister Antonio Costa has Indian roots.
I know.
Does that act as a catalyst in this
It
relationship?
was fundamental. You know that I know Prime Minister Antonio Costa since he was my student at the
Yeah.
age of 19, a good student. He has Indian roots, but more than that, he loves India. He loves India. And he got a kind of empathic relationship with Prime Minister Modi. And you know that politics are all about people. And all about this kind of empathy. If you do have it, it's one thing. If you don't have it, it's different. And ever since he became Prime Minister, we've had his visit to India twice. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Portugal once. So many ministers, Portuguese ministers being in India and the Indian ministers being in Portugal. So all of a sudden, there was quite a change in so many fields. I'm going to tell you. Well, political field. Portugal is very much supporting the idea of India becoming a permanent member of Security Council.
Yes.
For us, it's a key point in our foreign policy. Second, in economic cooperation. Where and how? I would say so many areas. For instance, infrastructures, water, sanitation, communications, telecommunications, but also coming from India, of course, auto industry, and defense cooperation, both in the army and in the navy, but also scientific, technological cooperation there between not only political powers, but also universities and the companies. And all this happened in 4 years' time, 3 to 4 years' time. It started changing. So
Absolutely.
that's why now we need to have an investment agreement. While we are supporting the investment agreement and the free trade agreement between India and the
EU.
European Union,
Okay.
EU,
Yeah.
we do need a bilateral agreement for
As
investment.
well. Oh.
As well, yes, of
Yeah.
course, because you know, those that existed concerning EU members
Yeah.
were denounced by India in 2017. So it's up to us to build, speaking Portugal.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a new agreement on investment to have more investment from India in Portugal, and more investment from Portugal in India, and
Interesting.
then the
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
because you don't build a sustainable relationship without people.
People. Yeah, we'll touch upon some of these aspects that you have touched upon, but you are coming to India in February in what will be a state visit. This will be your first visit as the President of Portugal to India, and also your first ever visit to India.
First ever.
First ever. How
It's
is
a
it that you
dream
haven't
of
been to India
mine.
before?
And never accomplished. Well, my idea of India, I'm going to tell you. Nature, a wonder. People, so interesting. History, tradition, but also so dynamic in the present and for the future. Socially, economically, culturally, so rich as a community of different people and different ways of living and reasoning. Then, of course, a global power. India became a global power.
Yeah.
not just a regional power. Politically speaking, diplomatically speaking, geostrategically speaking, economically, well, and speaking of science and technology, well, it's a world that represents much more the future than the past or the present. So, and then how marvelous it is to deal with it in democracy, because it's much easier to deal with this kind of continent. And so many variety of people and situations with dictatorship, but you do it in democracy. So,
Yeah.
and so for me, knowing a little bit of all this reality,
Yeah.
not by heart, but carefully after studying it, it's different to get to know. There, because we have here an important community coming from India. But it's different, you know, to speak with them and to see India.
Yeah,
there.
you'll see it with your own
It will
eyes
be a
once you go
short
there.
stay,
Yeah.
but a useful, and I think the relationship could improve, because not only getting to know personally your president, but your prime minister, it is important to go on. Your prime minister has ideas on the relations between the two countries, deepening these ties,
Fair enough.
strengthening these ties.
Yeah. So that's a broad overview of the relationship, the leadership in India, your mental image of India. But when you come over to India, you'll be going to Delhi, Mumbai, and also to Goa.
Yes.
So do you see Goa becoming a bridge in this bilateral relationship between India and Portugal?
It could also be. It could also be. I mean, we have relations at the federation level between president and prime ministers and governments, and then we have a specific experience, a mutual knowledge that is called Goa. I mean, most of the European countries have been in India, never been in India, or been in India for short periods of time. Our knowledge of India, your knowledge of Portugal,
Yeah.
it's a long-standing knowledge, sometimes with problems, as you know.
Yeah.
That's history. But at the same time, you get to know not only the relation between different languages, mother tongues, but also religious traditions, because in Goa most people are still Catholic, or they used to be Catholic. And then it could be economically and scientifically and socially very useful for our mutual understanding and mutual cooperation.
In terms of cultures and people-to-people contacts, do you see India and Portugal coming a long way already, considering that there is a Center for Indian Studies here in Portugal, which is really a first in Portugal. Besides that, there are several scholarships that India extends to Portuguese
In several
students.
universities.
Yeah.
Our universities are celebrating agreements with your universities. Even now, while I'll be staying in India during my state visit, we shall have a new agreement signed by Coimbra University and one of your leading universities. I mean, this is going on. Academic reciprocity
Yeah.
and cooperation.
Since you're talking about
Scientific.
reciprocity, if I may add here, that Portugal is quite welcoming of migrants, and that is rare in contemporary world. You have an easier migration regime, or you're easing your migration regime. India, on the other hand, has a demographic dividend. You know, there are English-speaking youth who are hardworking, they integrate well with society. So do you see a win-win partnership here?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. That's what was discovered a little bit too late, but you know, life is that way. We take sometimes too long to understand what is obvious. It will be a win-win relation, because our way of seeing, of including, of dealing with the world, our multilateral approach of the world is very much alike yours. So the way we deal with regional problems with the global powers, and with the regional problems and with global problems matches. matches. That's why, as you know, our Secretary General, the Secretary General of the United Nations, is Portuguese, Antonio
An old friend
Guterres,
of yours.
and supported by India.
Yeah.
But we have been supporting our candidates
Yeah,
in
yeah.
every international organization.
Including the International Court of Justice.
Yes, of course, which means
Yeah.
that we do understand how important it is to cooperate in a world that is protectionist, unilateralist, very little multilateralist, where globalization is there, but some people don't like to admit it. We do admit it, and we work on it together
Okay.
with you.
So absolutely. So there are congruences really in terms of world views, in terms of a number of global issues. And you said that Portugal continues to back India's bid for a permanent membership of the UNSC. So you consider India as a natural candidate there?
Yes, it's a natural candidate. I think it should have been done a long way ago. But at the same time, because you are a key global power in the world, you know it.
There is a by and large agreement that India and Portugal reached on a principal level at least, that India would become an associate observer with the CPLP.
Yes.
And in those countries, Portugal has been exerting considerable
And
influence.
that's another level of cooperation.
Trilateral cooperation.
CPLP means, for
Yeah.
our spectators, so
Yeah.
that they can understand, Portuguese-speaking community.
Yeah.
We're speaking of Brazil, we speak of Angola, we speak of Mozambique. I mean, we're speaking of regional powers or future regional powers. So many countries spread all over the world, in every continent, and touching every ocean. It's so important to have joint ventures and cooperation in those third countries.
Particularly in Africa.
In Mozambique, for
Yeah,
instance,
absolutely.
where you have a strong tradition. Most of the Indian community that is living now in Portugal came from Mozambique. They went there while it was still a colony. They came to Portugal, and they belong to different religious communities, you know it, and Hindu community, also Buddhist community, also Muslim community, Ismaili community. So, and there is a unique opportunity in those countries. Mozambique is very special, but also Angola, but also Brazil, of working together, economically speaking, and scientifically speaking. I heard that the president of Brazil was recently in India.
Absolutely.
Just came
He was the
from
chief
India.
guest.
I know.
Yeah.
And so CPLP could be so interesting for India, and working with Portugal would be so natural.
And you share a very special relationship with Mozambique, isn't it? Tell the viewers about
Personally?
it. Yeah, in the 20s.
Personally,
you were there.
because my family lived there for a while, and I myself consider and say it, which is not politically correct, that is my second country. So after Portugal, I just came from a visit to Mozambique, which is the second in my term, and I feel at home because I know everybody, and well, I live there.
And you
I
went
know
to the barber
country,
shop, got
so
a
it's
haircut, took the
always-
barber by surprise.
Well, you
that's
know everything
the kind
about
of common
me, you are
touch that
becoming
you have,
dangerous.
yeah.
And so Mozambique is a case where it fits so well, this idea of cooperating, India and Portugal. It's natural.
And you said that Portugal is all for a BTI, a bilateral trade and investment agreement between India and the EU, and also between India and Portugal. In the post-Brexit world, what role do you see Portugal playing in taking this relationship between India and EU forward, particularly when Portugal becomes the president of EU once again?
You know that we have, as our oldest ally, England. We have an alliance with England that lasts for over 600 years. So we know the British very well, they know us very well. In the north of Portugal, there is even an activity, the one of Oporto, that used to be owned by British and citizens. Now it's Portuguese and British. So we have special ties, economic ties, with the United Kingdom, Great Britain. And that makes also easier this trilateral cooperation between India, Great Britain and Portugal. We'll always be in the European Union, always. And we'll always be there fighting for an agreement with you, free trade agreement. It's even strategically very important for European Union, very important. But having those bilateral relations we have with Great Britain, it is even easier now in this new phase, because it's a new historical phase, to strengthen our ties trilaterally with you, and being Portugal inside the European Union, also with the United Kingdom.
Terrorism is a global concern, and the epicenter of terrorism is in India's neighborhood. In 1996, India had at the United Nations proposed a comprehensive convention on international terrorism to counter terrorism, but there has been no breakthrough on that. Would you like such a convention to fructify, to come into force? And do you agree with India's stand that state sponsors of terrorism should face punitive action?
You know that Portugal is playing an important role in international missions, United Nations missions, fighting against terrorism. Whatever is needed to do, legally speaking, but not only legally speaking, I mean also, well, in those missions, with our troops fighting terrorism, wherever it appears, it's very important for peace in the world, and we must work for peace. I know that in periods like this, where one is very selfish, very egoistic, very, as I just told you, unilateralist, too protectionist, people don't think of peace as a reality. So just when it's useful for them. But we must think of peace and have a global agenda on peace.
Can it be business as usual
And that's
on this?
and that's what Secretary General Antonio Guterres is fighting for. Yes, in the United Nations.
How do you see India's leadership on climate action? Because India and France together had launched the International Solar Alliance, and several countries are signing up there, even as there is bilateral cooperation in renewable energy that is taking place between India and Portugal. And India has proposed a coalition on disaster resilient infrastructure as well.
We owe you a lot.
Okay, yeah.
And you owe a little bit also the European Union and Portugal, because we're trying to pave the way inside the European Union also with the climate change public policies. And we all know that is a real problem. We cannot deny it. Some states still deny it. Or they don't deny it, but don't want to deal with it. And India, European Union, and of course Portugal, we are working on it. We know it is, for younger generation, is even a worse problem than for my generation, because they're going to live longer, and they will have to face the problems of the lack of intergenerational thought. So that's why we must go on fighting, because we are late. We are late. We must recover what we have lost in time. We have lost too much time when facing that problem.
Portugal is a soccer-loving country. Ronaldo is an icon here and the world over. Football is catching up in India. But how is it that there are no Portuguese football clubs that are setting up training centers there in India?
Well, you know that we have people are the way they are, and we have very good players, and we have very good managers, and so we have all over the world spread the influence of the Portuguese soccer. I do think you have not just the argument of population, but also the skill that could be developed. That's why some Portuguese decided to try to create those centers in India. And I feel there also there's a way of cooperation between people which is an amazing kind of cooperation, but so useful because people love soccer, they love sport, and it's a way of strengthening our ties, is also cooperating in fields that matter a lot to common day or day-to-day life for common people.
Do you follow football?
Yes, of course. Well, I am going to tell
Are you a
when
soccer fan?
when I was young, very young,
Yeah.
at the age of 22, I was asked to join the Portuguese Soccer Federation as a director, which was amazing for me, no experience at all, just after the revolution. And I love soccer, of course. My team is a small team of the north of Portugal. Anyway, now it's third in our championship. It's called Braga. It's not Benfica, it's not Porto, it's not Sporting. And then, of course, I follow very carefully our team, national team. I know personally Cristiano Ronaldo. He's a friend of mine.
You would.
And so, for me, knowing that soccer has also problems because it's also a business, and as a business sometimes it takes so many problems to deal with, but forgetting it as a sport, it's a very popular sport in Portugal, and it was there, just there, where Ronaldo, when after our victory in the Euro Championship, that he showed the trophy to thousands and thousands of people was here in this garden, and it was crowded over there. And so in a sense, and all the leaders of all political parties were here, meaning it's a national reality, and not a party reality or left-wing or right-wing reality in Portugal. But we have other sports we like, athletics and so on. But soccer is the special one in Portugal.
Absolutely, it acts as a unifying force in Portugal, the world over. What do you do at leisure?
Well, I swim.
You swim?
Well, I swim in the sea.
In the
Not
Portuguese
every
Riviera?
day, not every day, but twice, 3 times a week. Cool temperature, very cold, well, 10, 12, 13 Celsius, but I love it.
And you've maintained the tradition of swimming on the New Year, and your security guards
know
have
it.
had to train
Yes,
swimming
so
as well.
they must swim with me. It's a problem that disturbs them a lot. That's it. But even throughout the winter time, I go on swimming very early in the morning. I love it.
Oh, great.
It's very energetic.
Oh, and do you surf as well?
I used to, and bodyboard also. I started surfing and then bodyboarding, and when I was younger, till the age of 50.
And do you do the Japanese martial art?
You know it also. Yes, Aikido.
You do?
I started with Jiu-Jitsu and then Aikido. Now no longer. I used to do it till the age of 62, 63.
Would you like to try some yoga sometime?
You know it also, yes. So that goes on.
Okay.
Yoga and transcendental meditation, yes, I do it. It's very good.
You told us about your reading habits. So are you a bibliophile? How many books do you read in a day or at night?
You know that I gave to a huge library in my small village town. It's a small village where my family comes from. I gave 200,000 books. I mean, I used to be a collector ever since I was 15, but at the point I had 30,000, 40,000 books at home. I couldn't live. I couldn't even know where they were. So I gave them so that it's a small village. It is very, very poor. It used to be very poor, no longer. And so it was very good for young children, for schools, for people that didn't have the possibility of buying books. And I go on increasing that collection in the library. And I love books. I love reading books and I love collecting books.
One favorite book of yours? One favorite? It's a hard choice to make, I'm sure. Yeah.
Mine that I wrote? I think that the biography of my father and mother when they were still alive. My father was a politician during the dictatorship, but he was a very special High Commissioner in Mozambique, beloved even by the independence movements and liberation movements. And so I decided to write the book on the history of my family. Also wrote on the party that in a way I had founded. I also wrote on, well, different subjects, much more interesting than the legal books I wrote, than the lessons of law, public law, constitutional law, or administrative law that I wrote.
You're a fan of classical music as well. Who do you follow?
Yes. Mostly classic music, but also modern music, yes. Yes, of course. And you know, I was the first president to have here a book fair every summer, and at the end of it, I had concerts of rock music, never held here in the presidential palace, and hard rock, that was something new.
Okay. Mr. President, there's one thing that you and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have in common. You barely sleep, just like he barely sleeps.
Very little.
How many hours of sleep?
3 hours.
3 hours are
3
enough
hours and
for
a
you?
half. Yes.
Yeah.
I never go sleep before 4:30 in the morning. And then I wake up at 8.
So what's the secret behind the energy that you have?
Well, swimming. Swimming, and it's the way one is. I mean, one doesn't change at the age of 71. I mean, I was that way, and I'm keeping the pace.
Mr. President, thank you so much for speaking to
Please
us.
do
on
come
Doordarshan
back to
India.
Portugal with this sunny weather. Thank you. It was a pleasure.